billion Kenya shillings.
Yeah.
All right? Now, when you look at all this, you have to also ask yourself, what is the structure of this debt? How much of it is concessionary? How much of it is commercial? Unfortunately, at this point in time, for the first time in history, Kenya's external debt, public debt, has now exceeded Kenya's domestic public debt.
All right.
Now, let me just help in this, because I'm trying to make it as quickly as possible, bearing in mind your time. Now, here is the catch. Because the external debt has reached those proportions, the question now is that the central bank has been sending signals of caution as well. If now, for some reason, there's a depreciation of the Kenya shilling, the amount of exposure on Kenya becomes even bigger and more rapidly.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that we must be worried about.
So let me ask you this. Last week you talked about this not being about meeting the budget deficit, because there's a budget. Even if this 16% VAT tax is taken back in as far as implementation, that money still has to come from somewhere. What do you have to back up that claim that this is not about funding the budget, but about paying loans?
Well, one of the things that Kenyans may not know, but it's a fact, is that the installments of the Eurobond are due. About 100 billion, equivalent of Kenya shillings of the Eurobond, is due. It was supposed to have been paid sometime last year or towards the end of last year. I think the Treasury had to negotiate for postponement of that. You cannot postpone it further. So the pressure of the debts is now coming to bear. So the government has got to look for a quick way of looking for resources to start filling that gap. And the quickest way to try and raise some money will be on the petroleum products. It's the quickest and easiest for the government. Yet at the same time, it is the most painful to the Kenyan people.
So we're asking tonight, where is the president? All eyes on him, waiting to see what action he will take on this finance bill that will be taken to him. What do you expect from the president?
I think the president has got his advisors. But if I was to speak as a friend, I would first of all want to remind Kenyans that what you get from the IMF is what you negotiate for. All right? Now, in Parliament, there are some two issues that are very fundamental, which seem to be part of the agreement that was signed off. And I want you to know that to sign off an agreement, whether it was signed off in 2011 or 2013, normally the agreement of the IMF is usually signed by the governor of the central bank and the minister for finance. Those two are the ones that commit the country on any agreement, particularly with the IMF and World Bank situation. So that should be borne in mind. All right? So if you want to really go into this, then you must have to go back and find out then who was the Minister for Finance that executed that agreement, and who was the Governor of Central Bank that executed that agreement. If the agreement or the package involved removing, imposing VAT on fuel products. Okay? So if that's the case, I cannot speak for anybody, but I suspect that what is likely to happen, because there's the challenge of interest rates, the interest rate capping, which is an issue in that agreement with the IMF. Then there's the issue of the VAT. And then there's the issue of us not meeting our obligations, and how do we balance it so that at the same time the economy remains fairly stable. I would strongly propose, or I envisage a situation where Parliament or the President may have to consider lowering the top rate of VAT from the 16%, maybe to 12% or 10%, so that there's some loss of anticipated revenue in that component. But then, since this VAT is going to cut across the entire economy, it mitigates the fact that you are now putting it across. I also see a scenario where the president may have to propose to Parliament that could they also lend a hand as he mitigates on the VAT impact? Can they lend a hand in improving the economic environment by acceding to the lifting of the interest rate caps?
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I see that as a possibility.
All right.
If I were to be asked, I would negotiate on those lines.
All right.
But let me close by just saying this, that this fuel thing is so serious. And when you look at it, and just look at fuel as an issue, and it's very cross-cutting. You know, it affects the fisherman in Lake Victoria, who's going to leaving very early in the morning to go and fish because his boat for the deep seas, deep waters, may require a motorized engine, which requires fuel. The same fisherman in Lamu, the same fisherman in Turkana. And then it comes to the homestead, the kitchen, the transport of the border. It affects across the board.
Yeah.
But just look at this. Take this as a takeaway from own government documents. On fuel, which we bring at 58 shillings to the litre in Kenya, and perhaps the ship that has brought it is also carrying a consignment that is headed to Uganda. All right? This shipment, the government of the day charges the pipeline throughput. Then the government charges excise duty. Then the government charges a merchant levy.
Right.
Then the same government charges the petroleum regulatory levy. Then it charges the petroleum development levy. Then it charges the road maintenance levy.
So it's a lot.
Then it charges the SGR levy. Look at that. About 7 tax centers, 7 roadblocks. If you're traveling from Mombasa to Voi, 7 roadblocks in the way.
Yeah.
And then now you add the 8th, which becomes the value addition tax at 16%. And this is one government collecting all these funds from the same person. Okay. And then our petrol becomes 128 shillings to the litre. And in Uganda, whose fuel passes through to Kampala, then sells it at 75 to 80 shillings per litre.
All right.
You can see the dilemma we are in.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for making time for us. Musalia Mudavadi, he's the ANC party leader. Unfortunately, our time up. Back